Oh, good.
Yeah, I've got the ladies in the background as well. Which side are they on? There you go. The green girls.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Guys, it's a blank wall.
That's all right, man.
I'm going to listen to that.
Nice.
I'm ready now. Ready.
You're ready? All right.
Totally ready.
This tells me I'm on air. Yes, then, but I actually don't know if I am or not. I can't feel it. I've gone live.
Close this.
Right, okay.
That's all right.
I'm just letting you know we're actually live right now, yeah. We are live right now, yeah. So
We are live. Okay.
This is
we're
good.
live. People can see you, yeah.
That's okay.
Let me close this.
Right.
It's got the Umar. Umar in
See?
the building.
We're actually live right now, yeah.
Cambo, right.
You're live. People can see. You can see what you're doing. Good afternoon, everyone who is just coming through from different places.
It's got the Umar. Umar in the building.
Someone needs to mute their.
Or put their headphones on
Yeah.
or something.
How about now?
Yeah. Better.
All right.
Cool. Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We got Uma in the building. We got Tambo. We got Jennifer. I got a number of different people. And yes, this will be recorded. So I'll put it up afterwards as well. A number of people told me they couldn't make this time, but they definitely wanted to get involved in the conversation. So I made sure. I'm hoping it is being recorded. I think I've set it up right. First time using Restream. So if it doesn't run, allow me. But that's all I can say to that. But today is having a real talk conversation. And just before I actually go into that and I introduce my esteemed guest as well as the author himself, someone actually sent a message last week asking why am I having this kind of conversation on LinkedIn Live. Like what's it to do with? Why shouldn't we have this kind of conversation in private? And I thought it'll be kind of great to kind of set the tone for this, because when you talk about mental health, this is not a private conversation. Some of the things that Alex actually talks about in the book is the fact that a lot of the conversation I've been had in silos, or people haven't had spaces, avenues to be able to have these conversations and able to learn how to do it in public. And even from a work perspective, I was looking at some stats recently. One of them was that only 11% of people talk to their managers about their mental health. And one of the biggest mental distresses when it comes to men is around work. I mean, it accounts for, with suicide accounting for 3/4 of all the registered suicides in the UK. If work is the number one priority, a lot of leaders and organizations and places need to know how to be able to relate to their people and have these kind of conversations. And that's why we're having on this platform. And that's why Alex's book came at such a great time, where we can delve into it, we can unravel certain stereotypes and actually talk to this esteemed panel as to how they talk about their mental health, how they have real talk conversation with their friends. And this is not just about men. This is about men, women, all of us together, learning how to relate better with one another. And with that said, I'm going to stop talking and introduce my panel. And I will start with the author himself, Mr. Alex Holmes. How are you doing, sir?
Hi. I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I didn't realize, naively of me, I didn't realize how busy this was going to be, like post-publication. But here I am, doing all the stuff. But yeah, I'm good. I'm in a good space. Thank you for setting this up and having this. You're right about what you said about bringing this conversation to a platform like this. It's super important to kind of have more of these conversations. And the more and more I have these conversations, the more empowered I feel about the book. And the more I'm receiving conversations around this stuff everywhere. I'm seeing it in all manners of places and things. I'm just so happy that the conversation is being had. But yes, I'm Alex. I'm the author of Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging, and connection. I'm the host of Time to Talk with Alex Holmes, where I speak to people about their emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, and just really kind of tap into their journeys. Jay has been on before, David has been on before, Nick has been on before, Shope is yet to come on. And you guys are all like, I know Shope's looking at me sideways. Every time I post a new episode, he's like, well, where's me? But yeah, every conversation I have on there, I learn something amazing, something new. It adds to the wisdom and the learnings, and how I can apply that to just become a better person, a better man, and really just expand through all of that, and really dig deep into how I show up in the world. So yeah, that's a bit about me as pertaining to the book and the podcast.
Thank you very much. I will go to you, David. Introduce yourself to those who don't know who you are.
Hi, my name is Dave McQueen. I am a father, a husband. I am a leadership coach. I am a troublemaker. And so I've come here to make trouble today to support Alex. I'm really proud of him. How long, even when he started out on this journey, and when he was going through that first editing process, I know how deep and frustrating it was to see the other side of this. A lot happier, skipping for joy, for want of a better metaphor. Real pleasure to be here, to be able to support him.
Thank you very much. And go to you next, Jay.
Hey guys, so yeah, my name is Jay Richards. I'm one of the co-founders at Imagine, and our mission at Imagine is to help Gen Z to shape their future. We know the best way for them to do that is with brands. So we help agencies and brands to crowdsource feedback, ideas, or insights from our community of Gen Z consultants. But yeah, and Alex, a while he grilled me on a podcast. I think we did it twice. I want to say we were on
Did it twice.
Yes, we did it twice. Of course we did. Alex is very thorough. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here and excited to talk about what I learned from the book, and just to support Alex. Thanks, guys.
I'm going next to Nick.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Fika, a mental fitness platform, a business that was founded really to try and plug the mental education gap that we have in our country, and help people to think about mental fitness rather than just mental health and mental illness. And we do that through a tech platform that we've built over the last 3 years, and we work with education institutions, workplace, and healthcare. And I met Alex. I first met you when I think you were very gracious and gave us an interview when you were working at Metro newspaper. Yeah. And then off the back of that, really enjoyed meeting you and talking with you, and then you invited me onto your podcast. And yeah, really, really grateful to be here to help support what is a really incredible book, much needed, and looking forward to the debate.
Thanks, Nick. And conscious of the time, I'm just going to go straight into it. And the first topic I really want to touch on is loneliness. That's something that you obviously write about in the book, Alex. You used the Joe Cox Commission on loneliness, where it talks about 1 in 20 men have no friends. 1 in 10 who have had friends said none of them were close. And then the BBC Loneliness Experiment as well talked about how men generally feel lonelier than women. And there's a phrase that you put on there which said, a time when we are a lot more connected by technology, especially over the last year. Why does it feel that we are more disconnected than ever on an emotional level? I'm not straight to you, Alex, on that.
Yeah, I think that with regards to that was quite shocking for me when I was going through it, and in all the conversations I've been having with the editor and the agent at the time of writing, I was like, I don't like at the moment in time when I was writing, I was like, I don't necessarily see this with regards to kind of like my friendship groups and the kind of people that I'm around all the time. But more times out of 10, there are people who and in the conversation I had throughout the book, curating and cultivating like true friendships and people that are there for one another and can actually help bolster the emotional nurturance of men is kind of, it's very difficult to kind of expand into. People find it hard to kind of move out of the banter phase and into kind of a more in-depth conversation and more in-depth relationship phase with regards to platonic friendships and stuff. And in a world that is more and more connected, I don't know. I mean, it's just that there's this distance that we have. You know, like, I mean, I've had the conversation with Nick before with regards to kind of like showing up, going to the pub, but not really having the in-depth conversations because there's a fear there of really connecting and really digging deep into these emotional conversations, you know. And I think that, you know, whether it is online or in person, we can still connect on a deep level. We can still make the effort and we can still do it, but it just becomes this thing where what I find is that a lot of men just don't know how to do that. And what does it mean to connect, quote unquote, on a deep level? You know, there are places that men just won't go.
Mm-hmm. So taking off from that question, and what does it mean to connect on a deeper level? I'm just going to go straight to you, Nick. How does that connection play out for you?
Yeah, I think it. You know, I was thinking when you put the first thing forward about loneliness, that I think a lot of us can like feel initially that does loneliness mean that you don't meet people, or you know you're on your own. And I think there's like there's a subtle difference. I think you can hang out with people a lot but still be very lonely. And I think that's down to, you know, the point that Alex is making there, really about how do you really tell your whole story? You know, how do you talk to your friends or the people you're with about what's really going on in your mind? And I think we, as a culture, we haven't encouraged that here in the UK. It hasn't been encouraged to just speak up and speak out. We don't really get taught that in early years, and it's not always encouraged. And I think the culture of, you know, kind of deal with it or get on with it, or, you know, everyone's too busy. You know, sometimes, you know, we get stuck as men, I think, thinking, and I think this is probably common to men and women, but just speaking for myself, I know that I have in the past thought, I don't want to burden somebody with my troubles. I don't really want to lay that on them, or I don't think they're interested. You know, the fear of rejection, and I think all of those things lead to you keeping things locked in. And I definitely kept things locked in for a long period of my life. And I thought that was a strength. You know, wrongly, I thought that actually I could cope with everything. I didn't have to tell anybody about my problems. I could just keep it all locked in and just keep going. And, you know, after my best friend Ben, you know, took his life, I kind of started to really look at mental health and, you know, try and understand it better. And in doing that, I recognize that actually being open takes a lot more strength, but also it gives you a lot more strength, and you feel much more able to cope, I think, when you can be really honest with people. And in return, what that does is it brings people closer to you. So I think you relieve your loneliness by being really open. Kind of, it's a bit of a paradox, really. If you can be more open, then you tend to be less lonely because people are connecting better with you.
And there's this element of trust, isn't there, that comes with it as well. And it's like, guys have to trust who they're speaking to. They can't just be out here like, you know what I mean? Because it's just this it's this notion of like, not really, you have to be able to be what's the word? You know, you have to be able to protect all the stuff that is going on here.
Yeah.
And then kind of like give it out in drips and drabs. I mean, you start giving it out in drips and drabs, it's like people are getting misinformation here, there, and the other. And then when you look at the wider picture of someone's life, I had a conversation with my dad yesterday. We were just talking about like a family friend or whatever. But when we look at the wider picture of the life and the kind of patterns that are happening, it's like, wow, like what's going on? Like there has been no conversation as to what's happening. Everything has been fed through different people who have experienced this person, but there's not been that like not being able to have that conversation one-on-one with someone to be able to kind of give them the real, you know. So yeah, it's one thing that needs to change. This is why we need to talk. So
What about you, David? How do you, when you think about loneliness and having that conversation and having that trust with other people, how have you navigated that over the years?
So I think it has to be built up personally. Many years ago, I remember when I was involved in youth work, I knew a lot of, especially younger people, didn't really want to talk. So basically, I used to take them out of the city, take them, you know, when I say take them out of the city, just for everybody, this is context, this is safeguarding, this is with a youth group, okay? Just so everybody knows, right? Let me just make sure I contextualize it. Okay. But we take them out of the city, take them to Epping Forest, take them to Hainault, take them down to Southampton, what have you, and remove from that usual that they had when it was just trees and bird song and river and no PS4 and all the rest of that. You know, the fact is they would either get bored and they had to talk. So I would leave you in a place, I would bore you to tears, and then we'd talk. And it was really interesting because what I learned from that as well is that the reason they were able to talk is if I made myself vulnerable. So I asked them, I said, look, you can ask me anything you want about me. And they go, well, what? I said, just ask me anything. So obviously, you know, like a 14, 15-year-old boy, they'd be like, do you watch porn? I'm like, yeah, of course I have, bro. Which site are you talking about? Or they go to me, all right, you know, have you ever taken drugs? And I'll be like, yeah, of course I've taken drugs, man. But I saw weird colors that I never saw before in my life. And I was like, nah, this is not for me. So we do that. We break it down. And then I say to them, before you say anything to me, just be okay that you're happy to share that with me. Because if you share something with me and I know that it might affect your life or someone else around you, I've got a duty of care. Otherwise than that, let's chat. I'm not going to tell your parents. I'm not going to tell nobody. We're good to go. And I actually treat grown men like that as well. Well, you two know, Chope and Alex, you know this is how I am anyway. I'll go and I will say the same thing to you. And I will also use humor as well, because it is quite serious. Some of my friends that I've known who've been through really bad anxiety and depression, I will use a little bit of humor. And I just say, listen, you need to tell me what's going on in your life. Because if you die, I will dig up your grave, I'll kick your ass, and I'll ask you again, okay? Now, for some people, that might freak people out, but that humor has been a way of like being able to break it down and go, look, I'm here. When you're ready, give me a call. But the other bit, and I'll say this is my last bit about it, one of the things I think is really important is that we have to create those spaces, intentionally create those spaces. I'm very intentional, like before the panoramic came along, bringing my men friends to come for dinner, would be online. You know, anybody over the age of 35 would pick up a call. Anybody under the age of 35 would send a telegram or a text message, because none of them like speaking on phone. But the fact was, you use whatever technology works and you get on there and you make that call. And I will persist. And this is me, I may be a pain in the ass. I will persist and I will always ask. Because one of the things about being a coach or a counselor, seeing people who have been through bad stuff, you pick up the signs very, very easily. You see it, not in a bad way, but you see it. So I will continue to ask until you tell me I will ask. I will be that pain in the ass. Because I know that without that kind of camaraderie around us, without those individuals that can give us a sense that our form, and Alex, I love the way Alex writes about this in the book, but let that masculinity be about how we define it rather than how someone puts you in a box, and then make sure that you have the safety when you're talking with somebody in that space, then I'm good to go. So yeah, I've got no problem with being alone, but I don't like being lonely. So I make sure that I put people around me so we can have those conversations.
Nice. How about you, Jay? Because especially with your line of work, something Alex wrote about in the book was around young people are self-harming to obtain emotional distress because they lack the right way to communicate. They lack the right language to communicate. And with a lot of people, especially younger people that you deal with, how do you tap into them? How do you communicate with them? How do you get them to break down those barriers to actually have a real talk conversation with you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that from the aspect of a co-founder of Imagine, really we're not deep diving with our community around that, because a lot of our community, they're coming to us because we're a marketplace or a platform that they can work with brands and get paid. So on that side of things, I can't really comment on that. But on the back of the points that both David and Nick made a little bit earlier, when David was saying using the technology you have around you to communicate with your friends, is exactly what I did with that. And I love how David called it the panoramic. And for me, during the lockdown, a great way for me to stay sane was to play computer games every evening with my boys. So every single evening we have a WhatsApp group, and everyone would just ping a message like, game 8 p.m, who's keen? And everybody would jump in and be like, yeah, cool, I'm down. And then there'd be 3 or 4 of us would jump on, and we're playing computer games, for an hour at most. But during that period of time, we're really getting to engage and having a great conversation about what's going on. And a couple of these guys I didn't really know before the pandemic, before the lockdown, but now I know them really, really well. And I can't imagine not speaking to them on an evening every evening, and it's something that's really powerful on that side of things. And then going back to what Nick was saying earlier when he was speaking about when his friend committed suicide, and I had a friend of mine that passed away when I was 19, and I didn't speak about that process or about how I thought until I was 26 or 27. That's the first time I ever spoke about it, and it's because I realized that it had such a massive detrimental effect on my life, and I'd never spoken to a therapist about it. Because I come from a background where you do not speak to therapists in any way, shape, or form. Do not speak to therapists because then people think you're crazy. So from my parents being both immigrants to the country, it was kind of the way they saw speaking about your emotions, especially as men. It wasn't a thing that we did. And my mom is probably one of the strongest people I've ever met in my entire life. But I have no idea what her childhood was like. I don't really know what her emotional state is a lot of the time, because she just doesn't talk about it even till this day. She's a phenomenal mother, but she just doesn't talk about those things. She keeps it very close to her chest. So I grew up thinking that strength was just simply not speaking. You keep things to yourself. You don't say anything to anybody and you'll be fine. And at about 26 years old, I realized that was a horrible way to live. So I began just firstly speaking to my therapist, and then family, and really starting to, what I found was, and this is what Dave was saying earlier, I found that with humor and with being honest about my experience, because nobody ever wants to be the one to go first, but as an extrovert, I don't mind going first. I don't really give a damn what you think about me anyway. So I would just say what I thought of. I was like, hey, this is what's going on with me. This is what I've been through. So, and people go, actually, raw. That's what's been happening to me. This is how I feel, so on and so on. So I think that's been my journey as a man, especially around friendship. Being open to friends. And for me, I've got two very close friends, my brother-in-law and one of my best friends. He travels the world, so I never really see him, but we communicate all the time. We're always WhatsApping, always voice noting, always having phone calls, and they I would say those two guys are my best friends, and I talk to them on a regular basis, just like, how are you feeling, what is going on, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that conversation when you said that you didn't grieve until you went to so later on in life, and then you finally went to therapy, started grieving. It was like that Oprah moment, when she was talking to Meghan Markle. She's like, "What? What do you mean?" I was probably like, "What?" Like, what? But that's the thing. But I've only ever known you as somebody who is open. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so it's really funny how when you meet people at particular points, you only have the context of the story from when you just joined them. Each and every one of you, from the points in which I met you, have only had that context from there on, and then it's the learning about everything before that. That is the deepening of that connection. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's actually having that conversation.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that now when I look back, I'm like, how the heck? So my friend died on New Year's Day, and then 3 days later, I just went back to university, and it was like nothing had ever happened. I hadn't spoken to. My family were kind of like, everyone prayed about it. It was cool. We're done. You've prayed about it. Jesus will look after you. And I just went back to uni, and I wasn't a Christian. So I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, this is not helpful in any way, shape, or form. I've gone back. I've got all these emotions, and nobody sat me down and said, how are you feeling? Nobody asked me that until 26, when my therapist asked me, and I just cried like a baby for hours. She was just like, all right, time's up. And I was like, I'm not leaving. I was like, you need to hear me cry. And I think it's that process, really. Just now when I look back, I'm like, how the hell did you not ever deal with that? But in the moment, it was something that's just how it was.
Well, there's something about that which also flows into what I'll call the traditional masculinity, where we don't necessarily talk about things that we go through, and it's still to this day seen as a weakness. You're told, man up. If you talk about your feelings or your emotions, it's weak, it's pathetic, all that kind of stuff. And it's still prevalent right now. And even though we also know on the flip side of that, vulnerability is strength, yet society tells us actually we shouldn't necessarily operate that way. So how do we start to apply what we know is true and factual and break down those traditional masculinity norms, or sometimes cultural norms that are wrapped into that as well? Anyone can go for it.
Anyone want to get? Okay. Be courageous. We need brave people in life. Everybody in this conversation works in leadership in some way, shape, or form. So we have to be courageous and we have to be brave. And as Will Smith would say, being courageous is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. One of those there's that kind of buzzing definition, but it's that. It's like that's kind of how you have to be the example that you want to impart. You have to break that kind of those mythological ideas and that kind of that false sense of protection that you have. You can operate in the same thing and just continue to perpetuate ideas and find the limitations there, or you can kind of break out in a particular way and really create new avenues for these discussions and for these conversations to be heard. So I guess it's just about being courageous, and each step at a time, just trying to really kind of push the bounds out, in a way. I think part of it as well is finding it's so important to find a support group, because very often you can be really brave, but you can feel like you're on your own. And I remember when, like years back, when I was in church and I was kind of like in a weird way, in an invisible way, I was the go-to guy for anybody who was LGBT plus and needed to come out. And I'm like, brethren and sister, why are you coming to me? But people felt that they could come and talk to me about that. And again, it went against that whole grain of being in the church, where there was a strong vein of people who were quite against sexuality in any form or what have you. It didn't matter what kind of Greek, Aramaic, or Hebrew I broke it down into, say this is what actually happens in the Bible. There was this massive pushback. And as I got older, what I realized is that even though you do, at this point, even though you're going to be really courageous, sometimes it's really important to find those one or two individuals around you who will remind you that you're not going mad. Because sometimes you can feel like you're just going on that like on your own, and it's so important to have those individuals around you. And I think there's certain practices to have. I think we're in a couple of us were in a men's group where somebody shared a video about a guy doing a prank where he called up his friends and told them all, "I love you." I'm like, why is that odd? I've been telling my guys I've loved them since I was 17 or 18. I'm hugging on football. I come kiss you on your cheek. I pat you on your bottom. I tell you that I love you. All that kind of stuff from day dot. Right, so that for me, that was a natural. But when people say, "What you love?" I tell you in your face. When I used to go to schools, I say to the kids, I go, "Look, I'm your dad, right? I'm like your dad." They go, "You ain't my dad." Like little white guy at the front, "You ain't my dad, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm metaphorically speaking, right? Like your dad, I'm telling you this because I love being able to see your success." And so I wanted to make the normality of a guy saying to another guy, "I love you," to have that connection without it getting twisted or warped. So when you have, for me, the two things are making sure you have that support group, but using languages and behavior that breaks that. So I've got a platform socially. When I was on Twitter many years ago, and more recently now on LinkedIn. So I use those platforms as much as I can to go, I'm going to say this. If you're going to come for me and you don't know what you're coming with, I'm going to come for you, your mum, and all your ancestors, right? And your granddad. I'm coming for you. But the truth is let's break that kind of narrative and let's have an honest conversation. Encourage that support, but also if you have that platform, see how you can leverage it.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. It's kind of ironic, and I always thought it was ironic when you kind of think of that male thing that you introduced there at the beginning of this particular bit of our discussion, where men like to feel closed up and strong, and that's kind of that sense of masculinity is this sort of like closed in strength. And yet you look at, potentially you look at the girls when you're younger and they're more open, they talk a lot more, they share a lot more. And you just track that forward to the data on suicides. And you just see how look at the disparity in the suicide rate. Male suicide is like 3 times the rate of female suicide. And yeah. I think the 45-year-old group of men is the worst case. So you look at that early practice of sharing, being able to talk about your emotions, being confident enough to talk about it and share and discuss. And then you see that bottling up over the years and what it ends up in the data. And so I think it's, I think it's really important, I founded this business, Fika, to try and reset that education gap, because actually, we don't teach some of these skills that you need, and I agree with what Dave was saying. I think, individuals have to lead 100%, and you have to, create the space so that, within all our businesses, I'm sure we do a similar sort of thing. We've got a very open culture in my business, and we encourage people to talk, and we have like Fika tables where everybody sits around a table and everyone's got 2 minutes to talk and no one else is allowed to interrupt, and we just go around a table. And because we do that on a regular basis, everyone starts to get used to the idea that they can always vocalize, and creating the space and a bit of leadership is important. But also we need to just recognize things like, back in the school days, we were obliged and mandated things like trigonometry and quadratic equations. How many times you use those in your 30s and your 40s and your 20s? I would have loved to get a bit of confidence skills being taught to me instead of some of that trigonometry or some of those quadratic equations, which I never used. You know, and there's a case for the education system as well to step up and start to make some of these coping skills, or what do we call them in the workplace? Soft skills. They're not soft.
Skills, yeah.
You know, skills of confidence and communication and positivity and motivation. They're the most essential skills of all. I'd put them over maths. I'd put them over English, and yet we just left them out. They're just not part of a structured curriculum. So I think there is a part for, you know, the country has to step up and look at the education system and how people are taught when they're young and through lifelong learning, and help to put some more structure in to support the skills that are basically missing.
AJ?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and this is for me. So my son's 14, and he's probably one of my best friends. And when he was 9 or 10 years old, we just started doing a thing that once a quarter, I would just ask him, like on a regular basis, we talk about everything anyway, but once a quarter, I'd just ask him and I'd be like, hey, like, what's going on right now? How do you feel? And just give him an opportunity. And then, because he's an introvert and I'm an extrovert, so a lot of times I'll ask him that question. And then when he doesn't answer for a minute, I get nervous and just start talking. So I've been getting better at it over the last year or so of just asking him that and then just shutting up. And just driving the car, or ask him that as we jump on the motorbike. And then whenever we get to the destination, I then ask him to answer the question. And I found that it's really interesting listening to him try to put verbiage to how he feels, because you can see a lot of the time, especially when I was his age, I wouldn't have been able to explain how I felt in such depth. And I started to realize that the reason why he's able to do it is just because he was given the opportunity to do it. It wasn't like I had to teach him anything or whatever. I just simply asked him. And it's such a blessing for me, because it actually now at 30, I go, oh, wow, like maybe that I could try to put some more verbiage around how I feel. And he's actually leading me in some ways. And it's great to hear him say that. And sometimes he just goes, yeah, no, I'm great. But other times he really wants to deep dive into stuff. So I think it's the importance around it is, especially for that younger generation, to how Nick most eloquently put it a second ago, of teaching that in secondary schools. And I think the reason why schools don't want to do it, coming from a family of teachers, a lot of the time is because with the quadratic equations and so on, you can easily measure those. But with something like this, it's harder to measure. So we're not going to deep dive on it or put money behind it because we can't measure it, and our budgets are based upon the measurables. And not realizing that the statistic of 50% of men committing suicide is a massive measurable that we should be focusing on. And I think I know personally that I've in the past suffered with suicidal thoughts just in moments of deep despair or whatever, and just complete transparency. The only way I've really got out of that is, and I know there's Martin put a question, I think his name was Martin a second ago, about when you have negative thoughts and you start to get into that spiral, how to deal with that. And a lot of the time, the way I've actually dealt with that is firstly by speaking to somebody, but secondly, I just sit there and just have a massive moment of gratitude and run through a list of what I'm currently grateful for in my life. And as a startup founder, I have to do that every freaking day, because every day I wake up and I'm like, I've got to, got a lot of things to stress about. But I think it's that having that moment of gratitude after speaking to somebody and saying, hey, this is how I feel. Can you just pray for me or whatever. Just have a moment just to sit and think, okay, what am I grateful for? I own my home. I drive my car. I have all these different things, and just list them out. And then I go, actually, okay, you know what? It's not as bad as I thought it was in this moment. Because I think a lot of the time, and having friends that have committed suicide or whatever, a lot of the time when I speak to people, it's that moment of despair. It can feel like everything. And I think, it must be immense to. My heart goes out to folks that think in that moment they have. There's no other option. And I think a lot of the time, so to simply put, allowing people to speak and to give people options, just to say.
This is the thing, and what I've been learning in a lot of the reading and the kind of the study and the things that I'm doing at the moment. It's paternalistic. Paternalism is what we seek when we seek to be permission for things. Men don't feel like they can do a lot of things because they're always seeking permission to be able to do it. because that's the paternal nature of kind of the system that we're in. That it's the permission to be allowed to do a lot of stuff, and then you get to 40 and you're like, wow, I actually have the choice to do this, or I can do what I want to do in the way I want to raise my family, the way I want to kind of take my career, the way I want to do all this stuff, because you've given yourself permission. And then that's kind of where I've been kind of trying to reprogram myself. And hopefully it came across in the book, but trying to reprogram myself to allow myself the permission to be able to say, you know, to feel what I want to feel, to express the way I want to feel it, and to express how I feel and who I want to express that to as well, because the permission starts with me at every single stage. How can somebody else tell me when and why and how? What does that doesn't make any sense. Personally.
Can I share a quick story just before we answer this one? So I was in a school and a number of years.
Is it a walk with me moment?
It's a walk with me moment, man. It's a walk with me moment, right? So just walk with me. So I'm in this, and I was in this class, and this kid was kind of like playing up, and I just kind of like, I don't know if you've ever been in education, you can always tell the really bright ones because they're just bored because they just got so much going on in their head. And the teacher just went and shot the kid, and the kid stood up and just was gonna, like, big kid, right, year 10, but looked like he was year 14. All right, he was a big kid, and I just stood up. This was gonna kick off. So I said, all right, before you say anything, all right, turn to me. Don't look at the teacher. Just turn to me. I said, tell me what's on your mind now. Permission to swear. You can speak whatever you are. Don't watch the teacher. Just don't watch me. To me, what's the fucking point of school? And to next point, what are quadratic equations? How's that going to help me in my life, right? Mum's an alcoholic, never know where we're going to get food. Dad doesn't really care. What's the point? So I said to him, well, it gives you the benefit, of being able to learn something. If you, he said, but I don't care. All these teachers are trying to. I said, all right, let me talk to you. Do you want me to explain to you what quadratic equation helps? He goes, go on and convince me. I said, well, if you take a quadratic equation, the actual angle helps in the curvature of the light in the front of the car. This kid starts cracking up laughing, like, who the hell has ever explained that to me? And I said to him, I know you're pissed off, and I know you don't understand it, and I know you've had the permission to be able to speak. Come and speak to me afterwards. But right now in this moment, I see how frustrated you are. What I need you to do is write it down, come and have a conversation with me, and we have it unfiltered. The teacher was upset. How could you let him swear in the class? I said, because if I didn't let him swear, he was going to clout you in your head. He was going to punch you. And the teacher was like, what? I said, did you not see that kid was going to go and punch you? And knowing the background and the statistics, he would have been expelled from his school age 9 and 10. It's a black guy. Let's keep it real. Right? He would have been expelled from school. So I said, if I didn't intervene there, he would have sacked you in the head. And then he would have been out of school. So I talked to the guy afterwards, had a big swear, had a big laugh, blah, 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 blah. And what I realized is, to your point, Alex, everybody's looking for this point where it's all about compliance and stuff is really pressed in. And then when you really do want to say what's going on, it's about all that drama the guy's got going on in the background, and you want to teach him about maths and presentation, that means nothing to him. And then you don't have that news. And to your point, the point where Jay was saying about, a lot of schools, because it's measurable, they don't want to actually. But this is all the stuff bubbling underneath. And so I guess in a big way, the reason why I share that story is because I think there's so much that we have to do, but in coordination. Like, we don't just dump our kids in school. How do we, as adults or those who are grown up, who only kind of like got a realization a lot later in our life, how do we go into schools or use social media or do whatever we conjunction with this to say, this is not the only way to have to go forward. Here are some options as to how you can explain it. Sorry, that just came to me just now, and I just thought I would share that. Sorry for school, Sophie. Sorry.
I want to add a point in as well. That it's interesting because Jay, you're talking about it as well. When and kind of the introduction of this section that we're talking about was, what can we do to kind of change this masculinity? And Alex, I know in your book you were referencing, when your grandmother passed away, when people asked you, you just went fine. You said I'm fine. And this is one of the things. And Jay, you said you create this space with your friends where you ask them a question and then you just listen. So there's that listening time has been provided. And actually, one of the things that I learned in product design as I started to understand technology was this process called the 5 whys, which was created by the product architect behind the Toyota business. And the process of 5 whys was really set up, and it was an engineering solution, right? So it was created in an engineering environment to understand the root cause of a problem, not the first answer to a problem, right? And so basically the way that would be applied would be when someone said, oh, the car, we didn't produce enough cars this month. Instead of it just being, damn, you're sacked, it would be, well, why was that? First, why? And they say, oh, well, actually it was because we had a bunch of people were off. And they go, well, why was that? Well, they were off because this happened. And well, why wasn't the new people in there? Well, why? Well, why? And they would keep going until they got those 5 whys out. And it's actually quite an interesting tool that anybody can use when, someone says, you say, okay, you can just start with the whys and just start digging. Or if they said they're not okay, you can start with those whys. And, like Jay said, just practice being a good listener, because we're all pretty shocking at listening most of the time. We're good at talking or thinking of our own agendas and trying to be smarter in conversations or not tell people things, when actually, if you try using those whys with people and actually listening to what they say, you can not only get to understand people better, but you can get to the root of the problem and get a bit more empathy and understanding of where people are coming from, and perhaps lose a bit of the bias and judgment that we often get when we just make those first decisions and decide not to, ask why.
So one of the biggest skills I've learned the years is even living that space for silence. Like, you always feel like you need to fill it with something, and there are times when you just need to let that silence be, and in that silence, give the other person an opportunity to actually talk. It's awkward at first. It's very, very, very hard to do at first. But if you can do that, it actually creates this kind of space to be able to open and be more vulnerable. And going back to a point that you made, David, around that kid, actually triggered something in me, because I was remembering the Sarah Everin murder. And when the hashtag was trending, not all men, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that came out from that, reading a lot into it, was they started exploring, why is it that a lot of men tend to commit crimes? And one of the forensics, I believe her name was Ruth, somebody, just a psychologist, she said a lot of men who bottle up their feelings and their emotions lead to them acting out in anger and lashing out. And therefore, the end physical violence that you get when they're a lot older, they didn't start there. It started out when they learned not to be able to express their feelings and their emotions, and they bottled it up. And that's why it's so important to be able to get into these kind of space like you talked about and express yourself, even from school. If you can learn to do that from school, when Jay's little one was little, it makes such a massive impact as to how you show up and how you express yourself and how you treat people, just generally speaking.
This misogyny, this homophobia, this racism, this class war, all of it stems from patriarchal ideas as to what it means to exist in this time. We literally saw in the States, obviously they've got gun laws that need kind of refining and restructuring, because they're not even made for today's society. But with regards to what happened to was it Georgia, and the guy went in and shot in the salon, and it was full of the Asian women that were in there, and he killed them in there. And when you look at that, when you look at something like that, when you look at the pathology and where it comes from, the Christian kind of the dogma that he was filled with, the guilt and the shame that he was filled with, the feelings of lust and all of that stuff that was all built up in him, and his only way that he felt that he could deal with that was to eliminate the problem with regards to that specific area of him, rather than, I don't know what the situation was for him to either seek help or to be able to have that help. But it can always stem back to what you just said about that emotional repression, and really kind of trying to do this all by ourselves. And the way that we are raising and educating boys in particular is having a devastating effect on society, as it were. So it's something that needs to be taken seriously. And because who wants to live in a world where no one can step outside and just try and make a living, or kind of just go from A to B without being accosted or assaulted or killed on the way? So.
And I've not forgotten your question, Martin. I think Jay touched on it as well, but he talked a question around critical self. How do you deal with critical self, negative self-talk or you're being too hard on yourself, which you're looking for perfection rather than progress. I know you talked about some of that in your book as well,
Chapter
Alex.
1. It's chapter 1.
Answer the question.
Oh
How
my
do you deal with that critical self and the negative self-talk?
Nick?
Yeah, there was a in that first chapter, Alex, the way you bring it up straight away, and I thought that's really important. And I think, to answer the question, I think the first thing is awareness. Just awareness that there is this label called inner critic, and you've got it, and it's in your head. And like you said in the book, your thoughts are not you. But that just that little bit of teaching is missing. A lot of people, haven't really been told that. They just crack on, do their learning, crack on with life, and yet this kind of like confusing inquiry keeps going on in your mind all the time. And until someone has helped you out by just labeling it a little bit and just like separating it from you, that without that first awareness, and awareness is like the first bit of the first piece of work that needs to be done there, I believe, because otherwise, if you don't have that awareness and start to, understand that your inner critic is not you, then it's really difficult to separate it, and therefore you do think it's you, and therefore you just constantly, you become, the back of your mind boils. I always think about it, the back of your mind a bit like a candy floss machine, right? And what we do is we take in small bits of sugar from the outside world, but then they blow up in the back of our mind, and that's the inner critic, and it's the emotional turmoil that we have behind our mind. And the psychologist Wilfred Bion talks about it, and he says that what you have to do with the stuff that's behind your mind, if you like, so it's almost behind you, you can't see it, it's this swirl of like thoughts, is you have to construct those thoughts into a sentence and get them out. Like Dave said, what he did with that, with that kid who was in that, in that state of rage, was a brilliant tactic, to say, write it down and get it out of your head. And that process of actually writing your thoughts down and writing those things down helps to turn them from unconstructed emotions into something constructive, which is a thought, into a sentence, and then getting it out. You can look at it and you can rationalize things, because you can rationalize what's in front of you, but you can't rationalize what's behind you. So I think the inner critic is like the doorway to then starting to work on the process of basically journaling and reflection on your thoughts. And I think that's so it's all kind of linked. But I think without the awareness of and being able to label things and being able to understand them and being given a structure that you can understand, I think it's very difficult for people to start to work on the inner critic unless it's really been exposed.
When we look deep enough, the inner critic is usually a parental or an authoritative figure that we've had in our lives. So it's kind of like that teacher who told you couldn't do much, that parent who consistently kept pushing you back. And it's exactly what Nick said, was just literally about detaching yourself from that identity. Because when you start to identify with it and kind of molds into your person, when you detach that and kind of really separate yourself from the thoughts in that space, you literally open up yourself to a lot more freedom in that, just because you then begin to quieten that space, and it just allows room for you to then say, okay, let me step into something different, into something new, into a new space that I can try and do something differently. But the inner critic is something we need to tame and not give power, because once we give it power, once we give it I don't know if you've seen the video, Stromae has a video called Carmen. He's got a song called Carmen, and it's literally about social media, but the imagery is pretty similar, and he's got like a little Twitter bird on his shoulder, and it expands and grows over time, as much because you keep feeding it. And when you keep feeding it and it grows, you become obsessed with it, and it takes you over, literally. And that's what I look at with regards to the inner critic, similar to what Nick said about the candy floss machine. So yeah, that was just a point to add.
That's something that you come across quite a lot, David and Jay. I know both of you are extroverts and you've handled different things in your journey. Do you still come across that inner critic that come up, or are you in a great space that you deal with that really well? Jay?
Me? Oh, so I thought you said Dave. David, I love how you're pointing at me. And when David was pointing, he was pointing towards the chatbot. So I was like, why is he pointing at the chatbot? Before I realized he's pointing at me, but he, I think I have to deal with the inner critic every single day. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm some kind of expert in getting through it. I think the main way that I find to deal with that inner critic, because actually I think it's quite loud. That voice is quite loud for most people, because in your head is, as I said earlier, it's just the gratitude list. I wake up every single morning and I write 10 things. There's normally, I have an alarm that goes off at 8 a.m. normally while I'm exercising, while the endorphins are high, and I go, okay, what 10 things am I grateful for today? And I smash them out, and then I have an accountability person that I just have to text that to every single day. And if I don't text it, they'll shoot me a text at like 9 a.m. They're like, yo, you haven't sent your list, what's going on? Because if you're alive, you should be sending me a list. I find with that, it enables me then to get perspective. And I think my trouble a lot of the time has been, I think a lot of times from a macro perspective. So then when my brain starts to try to look at the micro so much, I can almost like try and like choke it. And I try and like just like try and control it. And I think with something like writing a gratitude list, it just gives me an opportunity to go, hey, this is what's going on. That's a blessing right now. So enjoy that. And I think so. That's one of the ways I think I deal with it. I'm trying to think of other ways that I may deal with that. I think that's the key way. And I think that a lot of the time when I write that gratitude list, actually, I realize some of the things that I think are massive troubles. It puts them into perspective. Like, no, actually, wait there. That it's not as crazy as I think it may be. But yeah, as I said, I'm not an expert on that, so don't be looking at me like, Jay's got it down pat. I'm just going to write a list of 10 things, and that'll be great. There are probably loads of other ways that the guys can think of, but that's the one that really works for me. Yeah.
I think for me, one of the biggest things I found, and I learned, I think it's kind of like dropped for me when I turned about 40, was that, so much of what I was taught historically was about success and building up this success, get the job, get married, get kids, have a house, have money in the bank, all the rest of it. And then when I hit about 40-ish, I had this, life begins at 40. For those of you, for them young men who ain't reached there yet, let me tell you, life begins at 40.
When does it begin, man? Every time it's 30, it's 40.
It's always 40 for me, bro.
When is it like every time?
Other things happen at 30, but we'll talk about that offline. But basically, at 40 now, at 40 now, the penny dropped for me. And what I realized is that there was a bigger picture. And so what really guides me and what really shuts down my inner voice is that bigger picture. So like the bigger picture for me is this. I think of the legacy of the people who did what they did to get me here. Like I think of my dad. He came here in the late 60s and what he had to do for me to get here. So that's a legacy that got me there. So I'm looking back and going, right, people sacrificed for me to be here. And then I look at my kids, my own 2 kids, and then all the other younger people that I mentor and the people coming behind me. And I go, what's the legacy that I'm trying to build? And so when I look at what got me here and what I look at what I'm trying to build in terms of my own legacy, it's got nothing to do with me. And what I mean by that, it's got something to do with me being a part of that, but it's not just about me. So anytime that voice does come up, I go, right, what am I doing for those who laid the path for me? And what am I doing for the people that I'm laying the path for? And that just quietens it really down because then it's no longer about me.
Love that, man.
I love that. There were 6 myths that you mentioned in the book, Alex, which were real men don't doubt themselves, real men are fearless, real men don't cry, real men have no worries about their bodies, real men never fail, and real men are lone wolves. Now, out of those 6, which one would you say resonated with you the most? Real men are
Lone wolves. We're not. Because I said this yesterday and I was talking about it. And I was like, well, if wolves operate in a pack, I don't understand how you can be a lone wolf. That makes no sense. Next, there's been conversations around this alpha male business. And again, don't understand what that is. No one can really give me the definition, the real definition. It doesn't apply. You know, yes, leadership qualities and whatnot, but again, it's like being a king or a queen. Other people have to give you that crown. You can't be out here defining that way. Next question. So I'm just I was going through these lists of myths, and I was just like, so where do we draw the line, really and truly? But definitely the lone wolves one, definitely the body image one, definitely the crying one, which is the most populated one, because everybody tends to run to that one when it comes to men. Men don't cry, just cry now. Like literally, men don't talk, just talk now, sort of thing. It's just like it's a spell or some kind of magic thing that just happens. So yeah, those are all myths, and we all experience in different ways, and we all come from different experiences. So, you know, to actually say that there's one rule for anything, I'm liable to always look at it and be like, that can't be right.
Yeah.
What about you, Jay? And then you have to head up shortly. Which of those ones resonate with you the most?
Yeah, I think the crying one's always, because I love crying, man. So like, I'm like, I'll cry. Literally, I'll watch a movie about anything, and like, I'll cry, bro. Like, I'm emotionally, my heart is on my sleeve, but I'm ready to cry. I'll cry now if you want me to, man.
We're good.
I think, I think for me, for me it's the feeling after crying is powerful, man. Like that feeling of being like, oh, yes, I've got it all out of my system. And I think I don't know if that's a learned trait. Like I've watched some people. I don't feel like I ever saw my parents or my siblings cry, but I just think it was just something that I love to do. I think the interesting thing about crying, it's so closely linked to emotions. It's kind of like it can be seen as such a weakness. Like, oh, you're weak and you're weak, and I love it. And I love the idea of what you were saying a second ago about the lone wolf thing, because it's so funny that like people, it's in our society, and I know I've done it. It's your Forbes 30 under 30, your ABC list of da 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 da. We love that you're the pinnacle of our society. You are one of 30 people globally that we love, and so on and so on. And we praise that, like that getting to number one so much that we all have now bought into this idea that if you're not one of these like pinnacle people, then you're nobody. And I've just got comfortable. I was literally just speaking to a client about it a minute ago. I've just got really comfortable with being like, I don't need to be Ronaldo. I don't need to be Serena Williams. Like, I don't need to be these people. Like, it's not that deep. Like, I could just live a perfectly happy life and nobody knows who I am. Like, nobody will ever know who I am. I'm living a wonderful life. And I think the pressure a lot of the time for men, or for me, I can't even say for men, but for me personally, was always like, I need to, and I think David alluded to it earlier, I need to achieve these big, huge things in my life, and I need to be this lone wolf. Everyone's like, oh, Jay's such an extrovert, and he's so rebellious, he's been like this since a kid, and and I needed to have that to almost write my own story. And right? Yeah, and I was, oh man, yeah. So people talking like, Jay, describe yourself. I'm like, rebellious, and it's like it doesn't really matter. It's kind of just like I'm just me. I like certain things. I like to cry a lot. Whatever. And I think it's coming to that place of comfort in where I am and who I am and so on. So I'm not like I'm like 100% there, but starting to come to that place makes it a little bit easier. And I think those two are very interesting to me, the crying and the lone wolf, simply because it's a thing that society we perpetuate so much, but I just don't think it's that useful.
What about you, David?
Sorry, take myself off mute. The real men don't doubt themselves one. That actually cracked me up, and I know it was the first one, but it cracked me up. I'm like, men are full of shit from the time they start with that. Come and sit in my leadership coaching practice and you will see the amount of men that are sitting at the top of multi-million, billion-pound companies, and I will tell you about people who doubt themselves. Do people really believe me? Did that speech go good? What did you think? What was your opinion? I'm like, bruv, you're sitting there with 7,000 people over your thing and you're worried about that. Of course they doubt themselves, man. We always do. Of course, it's part and parcel of it. There's nothing wrong with that. And so for me, that was, I didn't say this to Alex personally, but I think it was such a great way to actually start the book, because it was a gut punch. It just went straight in there, slap you in your face, punch you in your throat. By the way, this is masculinity, isn't it? Right? Come on. But it was that one just jumped out, and I just thought you think about, a couple of us in a group now, we're doing a fitness thing, right? We're all teasing and bantering each other about doing the fitness, but you imagine they're these real David Goggins characters. Don't quit, don't ever give up. You got to get up in the morning, run up the hill, run backwards up the hill, run naked. You got to be strong. And you're kind of like, listen, bro, my ankle's hurting me, right? My back is in pain. I don't know if I can do this, all right? Let me just deal with what I have to deal with. And so that bit about the doubting themselves, I think it's like just not from childhood. A lot of us as men just haven't been given the space to do that, because we've been told to man up or firm up and all the other really bullshit kind of narratives that come out of that. So that one really resonated with me, and I just hope that for those who get to read this book and the conversations that come out of it, both old and young can be in a space where go, it's all right to doubt yourselves. Obviously not all the time, because obviously sometimes you've got to make decisions, you've got to do things, but sometimes it's all right to have that little bit of doubt. That definitely resonates for me.
And Nick?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of talk as well about the don't cry bit, but you guys have covered it really well. I thought, but I think it's really important that we, if you take that, take the myth and you kind of break it down a little bit. You've got that, and Jay mentioned it as well. Crying is, let's see that as like a peak emotion, but actually there's a whole spectrum of emotions underneath it. And I think that, the way, Alex, the way you talk about it in the book, when you talk about, bravery, I think it's really important that we flip that around. And bravery is about being open and being able to share. And if we can start to look at that as the thing you want to achieve by being brave, by being able to open and share, I think that's really important. And it really resonated with me when, and I remember, Alex, I mentioned this in the podcast that you invited me on as well. When I found out about the etymology of the word courage, like the stems of the word, and the first part, the core, is from the French or Anglo-Saxon for heart, and then the rage bit at the end is about passionate display or passionate communication. And so actually, when you unpack the word courage, it actually means to tell the whole story of your heart. So that's I always thought that was really, that helped me think about it as well. Courage is about telling the truth all the time, like always opening up and always being there and always being straight. And I've been on a journey to try and do that. I definitely wasn't that guy, well before, before Ben died and before the Fika journey that I've been on. Very closed up, very considered about what I said, very worried about what other people would think, and never really letting out the true feelings or things that were happening in my mind. Whereas when I started to on my journey and started to recognize things like that word courage is being really, I like the phrase urgently honest, just urgently being honest with people all the time. It actually just sets you free. You're not carrying the baggage of what did you say before. So I think that really resonated with me. And then the other one about the failure, like redefining success. There was when you talk about collaboration rather than toxic competition, that really resonated with me as well, because I was driven a lot by the early pressures of, you got to do this, you got to get good grades in that, you got to win this, and as David said, you got to hit all these targets for some reason, and they always seem like loner targets, like you're doing them on your own. But actually, the truth is, this is a long game we're all playing, and we're in it with each other. So the idea of not bringing your friends with you or your colleagues with you is really like off the charts. It's wrong. So I really like the way you talked us through in that chapter. It was really nice to see that sense of collaboration being really important, and I think maybe it's a good thing for anybody who's reading the book to think about, your own targets. How could they be better with other people involved or being brought along with you on those targets? Or how can other people help you? Suddenly it just changes the picture. It's not your target. It's a target for everyone, and it's going to help more people. and more people are going to help you. And in that, that sense of collaboration, I think is really important with success.
Man, that's so true. I think the more we work together, the easier it becomes to actually open up to people as well and to build that bridge of connection. There was a question that I was sent privately, which I'm going to ask you guys, and is masculinity under attack?
No, it's not. What is under attack is the kind of masculinity that we have at the minute and that we've lent into at the moment. Masculinity itself is not under attack. You can't attack something like you can't attack something that is so innate. The same with femininity. Masculinity and femininity, they work together. We've just been taught as a society to oppress one and allowed the worst bits of one in order for us to kind of keep the structure that we have in place. And and we see it every day, and we see things shifting, we see things changing. At one point in time, Donald Trump was the epitome of what masculinity was, and what leadership looked like, and what power looked like. And everybody was like clued up on the BS and really said, no, this is just not what we want. This is not what we want to see. I think a lot more people are looking around at their family, and they're looking at their friends, and they're looking at it, and they're seeing that people are suffering under this false idea of what masculinity is at the moment. And I've always looked at it as masculinity and femininity work together in such ways that we've been so used to kind of separating them and kind of keeping them so distinct and different. But if we look at it in the idea of a riverbank, the river is femininity and the bank is masculinity. It's how we keep things working together in order for us to make the changes we have and that we can make, and how we transmutate that energy into greater things, into greater ideals and understanding. So no, it's not. We're just unlocking the rest of it.
I know. I'm curious to hear what you guys got to say on there as well, David and Nick.
Yeah, thanks. Comments again. Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Is masculinity under attack? And I think we could maybe shift the point of attack to labels are under attack, which for the right reasons, right? Because I think labels, gender labels, race labels, social equality labels, you attach quite quickly to referencing someone by a label, and then you have this judgment that's based on your preconceptions or poor understanding of that person or that person's background. And I think that when you look at all the conversations now around gender labels, and I look at my sons who are at university now, and they don't think about gender and labels in the same way that I used to when I was young. They see it they see it very openly. They don't really class people as male or female. They don't really use the masculine and the feminine. They don't really see these labels that we've had in culture a lot, and I think they should be under attack. I think some of these labels just create bias. And I saw an article actually in the BBC recently from, I think it was Manchester University. They'd released a guidance on terminology, and they were saying, encouraging people of the university to not use terms like mankind and to call it people kind, and trying to change language a little bit so that the language doesn't just encourage the usual biases. And I think that's really interesting when you think about the labels that we have and the language that we have. It combined, language combined us into quick judgments, and therefore we don't really understand people properly. So I think masculinity as a label is under attack, and I think it should be. And I think all the other labels that we just use for quick judgment should also be under attack, and we should be a lot more open and ask why a bit more and judge a bit less.
Okay, I nominate myself next. So this way now, yeah,
That way.
that's right. Again, whenever I hear that, I'm always curious as to what people mean when they say masculinity is under attack. And you know, the interesting thing is there's no specific box around what masculinity actually is. One of the things I love about the work that I do is it takes me around the world. I'm dealing with a client now where I'm getting a lot of exposure to Native American and Samoan traditions, as well as Latinx and traditions of Han Chinese in Southeast Asia and Sri Lankan. And it's so amazing that there are so many differences when you look through those different lenses. So when we say masculinity is under attack, what do people specifically mean? And then we also have the other kind of like labels around what's toxic and what's not. And so I always ask people, you know, what specifically do you mean when you start to talk about masculinity? And here's the interesting thing. When you start to ask the questions, it goes to a specific stereotype. So I'll take, for example, Lil Nas. Is it Lil Nas or Lil Nas
Lil Nas X?
Yeah, I had to throw in the X there. You see, I'm getting older, Alex, man. I had to get the millennial to make sure.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here.
Bring it up, man. Bring it up with the extra. Yeah. My generation was just happy with just the Nas, but anyway. So with Lil Nas X and his video depiction around Montereau and the fact that he was very open about his sexuality and all the rest of it, and some people are really threatened by that. You know, there are individuals who are going like, you know, America's going to go to hell in a basket, and this is what's happening. This is the mark of the beast, the new age. You're like, dude, the guy just slid down a pole, did a dance, and you're getting really perturbed about that. But then what I've realized is it goes up against what some people have as an idea of what being a man is and how that man is. And a lot of it, to put Alex's point earlier, is steeped in this really weird paternalistic model of just being a straight hetero man who goes out, works a 9 to 5, has big muscles, wears Calvin Klein boxers, comes home, opens up a bottle of Stella Artois, eats some chicken with rice, jollof or rice and peas or plain rice, depending where you're coming from. And that's it. And you're good to go. All right. And anything that falls outside of that narrative now is a threat. And you're like, right, seriously. And then when you look at the statistics and a lot of the research, you see things like suicide and self-harm and war. A lot of these things come as a result of men not being able to live up to that certain standard. You know, I think Alex was giving the example of the shooting in Georgia, and this whole warped idea of what does it mean for me to be a man and to be aware of my emotions, to be able to connect with people. So I think there's people who raise that question. As I said, I start to ask the question. I don't want to make judgment yet, but I'll start to ask the question. I'm going to go. Nick has fired me up now. I'll just go in there. Why are you asking me that question? Well, what's your next why? I'll just drop it. I've got 4 more whys for you. Just bring it with your masculinity. I've got 4 more coming for you. So a lot of the time it's about asking that question, because often you realize that there's a lot of fear and a lot of very narrow views around what that masculinity actually is. And usually by the time you've actually deconstructed that, I think if you're talking to a person who's quite sensible, you realize that they've actually asked the wrong question to begin with.
I've always looked at it like this. This is masculinity. I can't even do it. This is what we have. And this is what we're trying to protect.
Yeah.
So you have that long spectrum of so many different things that are happening. And with regards to the Lil Nas X thing that you mentioned was really dope, because for most of his life, he'd been told that he's going to hell.
Yeah.
So he basically just said, okay, so here I am. You know, and everybody's up in arms about it. And he's like, what is what you've been telling me in my life? Oh, yeah. So, and it's like, because it's this weird protectionism over an identity that nobody can really identify with. It makes no sense. I don't get it. But, you know, I don't think it's under attack. I just think that, as I said, it's not under attack. What about you? What do you think, Chopin?
I don't think it's an attack. I think it's people and their presuppositions that is under attack. I think it's people, and we've been brought up a certain way, especially in certain cultures, to look at things in very, very singular lens, and that's being challenged right now. And that challenge is shaking up a lot of people, because it's bringing up a lot of other things for other people who they are forcing them to deal with it, which they don't want to. And rather than deal with your problem, it's a lot easier to be like, nah, I'm not dealing with this because masculinity is under attack, because you're trying to define me as something else, you're trying to change me as something else. And I think that's where it comes down to. I think people need to learn to. The 5 whys is brilliant, and it kind of drives that whole introspection look of, why am I actually thinking about this? Why is this actually a question? What is really bubbling up inside of me that this thing I've seen or something that someone said is hit a nerve? It's hit something. That's why you got that defensive response, like, no, this is wrong. So it's like, kind of sit with that and understand where that real thought pattern comes from. I think that's something you actually do really well in your book, where you start to unravel the different thoughts, different experiences, different examples you've had from when you were young all the way to now that have helped shape the way that you think. And it's that unlearning process, which is, I think, is very, very hard to do. A lot of people struggle with the unlearning of what we have been taught, especially depending on how old you are. But it's also very, very important, very, very critical to our growth to be able to reframe things.
Yeah. Yeah. From time my teacher was shouting at me, telling me not to be upset about not being able to do long division. I still can't do long division because it's triggering. But telling me that I can't, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm somebody, David knows this. If I can't do something, I get frustrated to the point of not being able to kind of function properly. So I have to know how to do it. And these patterns have followed me. And when I was writing the book, it traced it back to that one incident of me not being able to do long division and crying because I couldn't do it. I was, what, 9? Like, crying because I couldn't do it, to then be told in the way that I was by this person who probably didn't even like kids anyway and was working just, you know, because it's the noble profession of teaching, but to kind of get over it or stop doing that or kind of just get through it. I mean, I ended up doing the long division in the end, but the relationship I had with it changed. It meant my relationship with maths throughout from year 5 all the way to year 11 was a negative one every single time. If I can't do something, I can't express that I can't do it. I've got to find a way to be able to do it. And I just had to struggle all the way through to the point where I didn't need maths anymore and lent into humanities, the arts and humanities, and there we go.
One of my last questions is going to be around, how does talking, that bridge between talking and relationships, how have you generally managed to do that with your partners, those you have who are partners on the call? How have you managed to open up and share either current experiences or previous experiences which have helped you become who you are right now, to be like, you know, I act this way, or I talk this way, or I react this way because of X, Y, Z, and kind of let those who are close to you in? Because again, I know that's not very easy to do.
Nick, David, shopping, the veterans of marriage and all sorts of all sorts of things. The first line of that whole chapter for me is, I have never been in love. Like, and I have
you've had close people around you.
Pardon?
You've had close people around you.
I have had close people around me. I was going to say the observations I've had and the things that I've kind of seen.
I'm not letting you off the hook.
I know you're not. That's why I'm going to go first, because you're yes. So, but you know what? It's like seeing this stuff around me and whatnot, and actually really trying to understand it from that perspective is difficult, and it's tricky because I've seen firsthand what it looks like when people can't communicate and what that does to the family, and the disruptive nature that happens and that comes with it, because you follow that as a child. You look at that as a model for the experience, right? You look at that and say, okay, well, this is how it's supposed to be. And everybody that I've spoken to, a lot of the people, the younger people, the younger people around the group I was talking to, a lot of them had stoic fathers who were just there in physicality, but not emotionality. And it resonated deeply because I feel like that's a pattern that doesn't have, that's a pattern that kind of a lot of men experience and understand. the talking wasn't something that, especially in the African Caribbean communities as well, talking isn't something that has been kind of lauded up as something that is a defining quality in someone. Someone either talks too much, they talk out of turn, or be seen and not heard sort of stuff. It's the kind of things that is the kind of way that we kind of grow up and are pretty much raised. And I'm happy to say that I believe that is changing a lot now. But it's tough. It's tough. And when you see that happening and you see that go through relationships and you see that, it's tricky. And it's it's misunderstanding, and it's hard to kind of really navigate that and really understand where you go from there. And it's a whole lot of relearning and unlearning. So yeah, I was to say that it's so important to be able to cultivate like as what Jay said when he was talking to his son, have those conversations and give permission to be able to open that up, because it will only benefit you in the future. And be comfortable with speaking about stuff and understanding that the way people react to that is not you, it's their reaction to what you said and how you, and then go from there.
Go on, David.
David, you're up.
I love the way Nick got that sweet revenge in there. I saw that. It's not easy, but I just think it's like any memory muscle. When you start to practice it, it just becomes force of habit. And one of the things I've realized over the years, and I mentioned it earlier, especially when I was really involved in youth work, is that when you're okay with being vulnerable first, and when you're okay in creating safe spaces first, there are lots of individuals who will look at that, and in their own time, they will take up the mantle, and then they will speak accordingly. So, when I think of it in terms of family, so before I got married, we had premarital counseling. So there were a lot of things that were like exposed to me. I was like, first 2 sessions, we nearly didn't get married because we were like, really, is this who we're getting married to? Because this is not good. But then it really opened up a kind of thinking around what are the assumptions that we always have in our head because we haven't asked a question, or what are the assumptions that other people have about us because they haven't asked us the question as well. And so creating those spaces where those questions can be asked and we can sit in them and being okay. And I know historically from I can speak from an African Caribbean background, there are some people who just do not like to sit in discomfort. They do not like it because they're going to feel uncomfortable. And I know this goes slightly broader, but I'm just giving you in terms of my own personal family context. And sometimes people just can't sit in that. And, one of the beautiful things for anybody who's ever trained to be a counselor or a coach or a therapist, there's a marvelous skill of being able to sit in a room for a whole hour without having to say anything, right? No matter how much you want to ask that question, sitting there and allowing that person to be in that space. I think Jay was saying, like earlier when the person, the therapist was like, time's up now. He's like, nah, mate, I'm still crying. I ain't done yet, But being in that space where you sit in that space, that's difficult, but it's necessary if we want other people to be quite vulnerable around us. And so, some of us like myself are going to be outspoken and we're just going to say it as we see it. But I think it's just as powerful. The one thing I've learned from a lot of people who are very introvert is that, extroverts be like, word, save the world, boom, 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 fix this up. Introverts will be like, okay, so what's your thought then? And just that little thing will just blow you away, right? Because you're just okay, no one's ever asked me that before. So I think no matter what kind of style you have in your communication, I think the first bit is about making sure that you prepare yourself to be quite vulnerable around family, friends, and all the rest of it. And in so doing, you create that space for other people to follow on and do that as well, but make sure that they're comfortable with it. And not enough gets said about this, and I think it really needs to be said, is that we really need to be able to protect people when they do share that vulnerability with us as well. Because when trust gets broken, oh my God, when you see somebody whose trust is broken, that sometimes it's irreparable. Sometimes people, because it's just another repeat of failure. So knowing that you're in that space and somebody's trusting you with that space, if you know you're not trustworthy, don't be in that space and take on people's business. Say, look, I'm just letting you know now. Don't tell me because my mouth runs like water and I'll probably go and tell everybody like the Daily Mail. Let me shut my mouth and get someone else. But if you know you can be in that space and hold that trust, My wife always says to me, God help you, David, if anybody injects you with truth serum. Because the amount of people that you're holding their secrets and their stuff for. And I go, yeah, but that's important for me. Take some of that stuff. That's important because I know that's what gives that person strength. Why would I ever take it away from them? So that's my kind of, big up the introverts.
The quiet revolution.
Over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you on the introverts, and to be honest, what you put it really well there, Dave. I think you've got to practice this thing. You've got to practice being open. You've got to practice that idea of like sharing, because it isn't easy. And I saw Lee put in the comments there, you've got to have that trust before you're open. And it's funny, isn't it? In a way, you almost need to trust yourself to be able to put the trust out first. Otherwise it won't happen. Like you said, Dave, if you're not leading with that vulnerability, then the space isn't there and available, and therefore you don't get it in return. And I think in that, Soph, I think you're mentioned in that last chapter about love. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought actually, there's a point in there where, you're talking about, your missus pulled you up and asked you a question, right? And in a way, you then made you think about it, and then you kind of committed, and then you worked on it. And I think that there is a point, I think, where you got to make a conscious decision. I think a lot of us, and particularly when you get into relationships, you can kind of like be in it but not really in it. And I think unless you're prepared to commit, and you've gone, and that's both of you, you've gone, right, we're going to set this stall up, we're going to do this. I think until you've got that point, everything before that is just like playtime, and it's just, that's fine. Don't beat yourself up. It's okay. Don't worry about committing. Don't worry about being too open until you get to the point where you want to. And then it has to be, that's where you put the stall up that says we're going to trust each other now. And from that point, you kind of set some rules out, and you go, right, we're going to trust each other, which means we're going to tell each other everything. And I think that's a journey that you need to both be ready for and agree with each other. Otherwise, that when the trust goes one way or the other way, you just back out too quickly, and I think it just takes time. I mean, no one's perfect at it for sure, but I've always, with my wife, we went to a festival at the beginning of our relationship, and we went, right, if we're going to do this, let's just spend this weekend telling each other everything that happened in our lives. And we just basically just unpacked every skeleton, every little thing. And we just said, I'm going to tell you everything that's ever happened in my life. And we just swapped until we just got everything out on the table, like literally everything that ever happened. And then said, we're going to continue like this, where you're going to hear what I think, not what I say. But that was, we started like that because we were at that point where we said, we're going to commit, we're going to do this. And I think unless you got that committal, putting that stall up, I think it's very difficult to feel trusted enough to be able to like let it run out like water.
I'm listening to Nick, like, and Nick said everything. You put everything on the table.
I was like, what?
Me and Chopin are over here in the corner trembling, right? And, everything, including what?
Weekend as well.
Literally, but that's the thing, though, right? Once you've done that, you just feel. I genuinely, I've never felt so free being with someone, because there was nothing left, nothing to find out, and it's like. Just felt good, but it was like, yeah, it was tough, but
it's like what lawyers say when you say you can't tell me the whole truth, or else I can't protect you when it comes out. So you got to tell the truth. But
I get it, Nick. But I'm just going to be blatantly honest with you here. That's a work in progress for your brother.
I am
80% of the way. 80%. I'm working on it. Oh, God.
I literally just put an Instagram post up, and it was just saying, being courageous in love is the best way through, especially for men, because it's like all this kind of literature. Malcolm X my dad mentioned something to do with Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X said you only give 80, you only give 80% of yourself to your relationship, and you hold 20% back for yourself. And I think that if Malcolm X was alive today, he would have reneged on that statement, and you would have changed it. But these are the statements that people leave and that the people kind of take and they kind of hold on to as identifiers. You don't, when you're in that space, I would imagine is that you wouldn't hold that much back. I would imagine because you're then stepping into a new space. So I just said, yeah, courageous love is something that is a way to kind of move through. So it's back to that whole idea of what courage says and what courage is. And I guess that's probably what that's the book in itself, Courage, How to Be Courageous.
And you know what, I think that's the perfect way to finish this, because that's a good summary of this. And I just want to say thank you to obviously Alex for writing the book. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
To Nick, to David. Jay had to go, but real talk for just being open and honest. Everyone's conversation, it had to happen. And I'm so glad that you guys were willing to get involved and do it. So thank you very much.
I appreciate you all.
Everyone that's been listening and commenting, fully appreciate you. This will be uploaded shortly as well, so people can catch it up.
All right.
And they're right there. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you in the other one.
Thanks, everyone.